Alrighty, here we go. Design Today brings you my newest guest, Danno Ard. Yes, that is Dan with an O. It should make it very easy to remember. He and I go back all the way to school where we took many of the same design courses. Since then, he's had a successful career working as a product designer at many places like Qualtrics, Empathic, and currently at WillowTree out on the East Coast. He flew across the country to join me on the show today. No, just kidding, that's a lie. He, like many designers, are out here this week for the Front Conference workshops, organized in part by my friend Ben Peck, who was on the show not too long ago. Danno was nice enough to give me some time while he was out here so we could sit down and talk about something that I've got people asking me about quite frequently. Again, you hungry listeners are doing your best to make sure that you're represented in a way that's hireable, and I love it. Resumes are a huge piece of getting your first phone call or getting your first email foot in the door. For many of you, you'll submit dozens of resumes before you get a call back. It's not too uncommon. But maybe there's a few things you can do to clean that up or make your resume stand out a little bit more in that stack of resumes. That's what we're discussing today. Real simple, actionable tricks to help improve your resume. And I've got to be honest, this episode is one of the more actionable episodes. You should be able to listen to this, take some of those tricks away and apply them to your resume immediately to improve the likelihood of getting that call back. Give it a listen and let me know if you find it helpful. Without further ado, we'll jump right into the show featuring Danno Ard. This is Design Today. So Danno.
Hello.
Welcome to Design Today.
Hello, everyone.
This is it.
Yeah, this is great.
And I'm actually stoked about this. I told my wife, I said, yeah, I've got a guy coming into town. He's flying in for the interview.
There you go. No, let's keep it at that. I flew in for Design Today. So everyone out there, one day you might be here too.
And it wasn't an all expenses paid trip. Like, you sacrificed for yourself.
That's
like,
right.
That was impressive.
Exactly.
It had nothing to do with the Front Conference this week.
No, not at all. It is all about this.
So I want to give a quick introduction as to why you're here and the topic that we're going to be getting into. But before we get into that, I want to give you the chance to introduce yourself.
Sure. So I'm Danno Ard, also known as Daniel Ard.
You're not really known by that.
But I'm known as Danno in the industry, as you might call
Sure.
it, and by my family. I grew up in Rexburg, Idaho. Yeah, I mean, just growing up, I always wanted to be a pilot, and then I moved from that to wanting to do animation, and from that to wanting to be a movie producer, a film producer, and then slowly got into UX design at the end of college at BYU, Idaho.
Yep.
And I still like filmmaking, but I realized that kind of UX provided a more family-friendly, just work balance.
Sure.
And so I like film still, but I realized I could also do storytelling within the kind of UX space.
So when you were, you've had a couple different jobs over your career. When you were at Qualtrics, was that your first UX, like official UX?
So I came out of BYU, Idaho, and had the interviews with Domo and stuff, and I actually was hired at Qualtrics first as a front end developer.
Oh, really?
Yeah, and slash designer. We were doing their theme design for like when you take a survey, what that looks like.
Yep.
I was working on that.
Cool.
And so I got into UX from wanting to improve that experience, but Qualtrics at the time didn't have a UX team, like a dedicated UX team, until 6 months after I joined. And I just realized that where I wasn't potentially going to make it on that team anytime soon because it was more entry level what I was doing. So I got offered a position at a startup called Empathic, which was or is, I'm not sure where they're at currently.
Was or is.
Yep. There's something. The website's still live, so I'm guessing the product is, but they're in Lehigh at the by Thanksgiving Point, by the, like where MX is and stuff. And as a product designer, and then kind of moved up to a senior product designer as titles go, but really just working on the strategy and with the marketing team trying to promote that, which is Podium for the healthcare industry specifically.
Oh, cool.
Review management for the healthcare industry.
Cool.
After I left there, I went to WillowTree. And
that's in
Durham, North Carolina is where WillowTree is. And they started in 2008. as a company. When the first SDK was launched for iOS, they started building apps. Over 500 apps later, clients like Pepsi, Wyndham, and that we're growing big. So 2 locations. Charlottesville, Virginia is the main office, and then Durham, North Carolina. Yeah. So I've been following them since Qualtrics. They were on Glassdoor's top 50 companies. Qualtrics is actually 24, and WillowTree was number 4, or something like that. Sure. So I just followed them, and I applied, and lo and behold, I got a job, and have been there ever since. And currently I'm working on with Pepsi on a app that their techs use to basically take care of vending machines. So
you like the East Coast?
Yeah. The East Coast is very different from here. Obviously, there's a lot more greenery there. Here, you come here and you look out. Obviously, there's the mountains, but it's just openness. Yeah. And I do like that. I miss that at times. Is just being able to drive out that way, do something fun, and just have kind of more solitude at times. Yeah,
one of my best friends is in North Carolina.
Oh, really?
And that's what he always says is that he comes back to Utah or Idaho and he's like, I miss the big sky.
Yeah,
but
the open.
It's green here in North Carolina.
Humidity, you don't have to like put lotion on and stuff.
Were you affected by the hurricanes and stuff?
So it was really weird. The hurricane kind of horseshoed around us in Durham. So unfortunately, that meant other people got hit by it. But fortunately for us, we weren't hit by it that much. We had rain and some flooding, but not anything bad.
Not crazy.
Yeah,
good. So we might get a little bit more into some of your background, but jumping into the topic, the reason I reached out to you was really funny. I told you this in the message, but I can't even. I went back to see like if I could find it in like your LinkedIn activity, and it was buried, so I couldn't find it. But there's a LinkedIn post.
Yeah, the thread that.
Yeah, and I don't even know who the guy was. I think I saw it because I was connected to people who had commented on it. But it was a guy looking for some feedback on his resume.
Right.
And after reading his caption, looking at the resume, I opened up the comment window and I was about to comment, but the comment that popped up first was yours. And I read yours and I was like, he said exactly what I was going to say. And the comment that you made, again, we'll get into some of those details a little bit further, but the comment that you made, I was like, exactly.
Yeah.
That's exactly on par with, I guess, my thought process, right or wrong. I go and that's exactly kind of what I thought. It was cool to actually for me to validate that. Okay, I'm not crazy.
For sure. Yeah.
But I am often hit up by a lot of these new designers, budding designers who right now resumes are important. They're trying to get their foot in the door. They're trying to land their first gig. They're landing internships, and resumes are a crucial step in that. Now you've jumped and you've done a handful of things. You've always got some experience in building your resume out. You sent me over a handful of iterations of your resume.
Oh boy.
So let's talk big picture at first.
Sure.
Importance of a resume. I mean, how have you found value in iterating on your resume?
So I guess I'd pose a question to people listening, and you is like, what's the purpose of your resume?
It's like you're thinking like a UX designer.
Yeah, it's just like the objective of the app, or what is somebody trying to accomplish, and what are you trying to accomplish with that?
Right.
And if any of you in your brains right now thought to yourself it's to get the job, you're absolutely wrong, in my opinion. Your ultimate job with the resume is to get a phone or an in-person interview.
Yep.
That is your goal. If you're not striving for that, then you need to rethink that a little bit. So just a few things here that I've written down. Really, it's like the analogy that I have created with this a little bit was that it's kind of like a resume is obviously to get that interview, and so it needs to be catered to the job. And then the information that's on there needs to be, as in my opinion, stripped down as possible to the core elements. And if you think about it like fishing, you could include like so many different tackles and lures in your in your tackle box.
Yep.
But it's like, which one is going to hook them? And really, that's the focus, is trying to figure out which things is going to hook that company to calling me and bringing me in.
And so what is it?
That's the great question.
Does it vary?
Yeah, I think, honestly, for me, I think it varies from industry to industry. There's, creative and engineering and just different, and even outside of, products, doctors and whatever there might be that you have to fill out a resume for. You need to be focused on your industry and taking into consideration what items within your experience that you've done that will contribute to that company?
Yeah.
What impact have you made? Experience that you've had that can show them that I know what I'm doing.
Yep.
That's really what it is.
You know, it's funny. I've had the opportunity to do a bit of interviewing and hiring.
Yeah.
And one of the things that even I think I've kind of grown or evolved my thought process around resumes quite a bit. But more recently, I kind of came to a different conclusion that I may have even stated in a podcast earlier. But one of the things that I find important in that resume is you've also got to identify, you mentioned, who's this for? Who's seeing this? Mm-hmm. I also wonder if there's a difference in, are you sending this to a recruiter or are you sending this to the design manager or the UX manager? Because I wonder there if you should tailor your message differently depending on who's actually viewing this.
Yeah, I think there's each one is going to look for specific items, obviously as a UX manager or, a senior product designer who's viewing that resume versus the technical recruiter. Mm-hmm. Like technical recruiter is going to look for, let's say, maybe more cultural based things.
Sure.
For lack of anything else. And then the product designer is looking, okay, have they worked in, on mobile design? Mm-hmm. Have they done this or that? And so each one will look at it with different regards. And I think that's why it's really important to do your research of that company that you're applying to. It sounds like a lot, obviously, but if you're serious about a specific company, right, doing the research and seeing like who is the product designers at, like, go to their Dribbble account. Right. Look at their Dribbble account. Look at their LinkedIn. Don't worry if you show up as who viewed your profile. That's great, because then they'll probably look at your profile. Right. Cool. Exposure. So then you go through there, you read the company website, and you just figure out all these different elements of who those people are so you can consider what might be nice for them to see. Yeah. And then also looking at the job title and description and saying, okay, have I done that? Yeah, I did that here. Let's make sure to include something about that. Yep. So
one of the things that I know a lot of people are worried about is, like, how do I make my resume stand out in a stack of resumes? There's a lot of, I think, rights and wrongs in approaching that. Yeah. And I'm sure you've seen some of those rights and wrongs as you've looked at other resumes. What are off the cuff some things that you find important to help you stand out versus not important?
Should we go through the
Oh, you've got it already.
I mean, I really wanted to give some very like things that you should definitely consider.
And I really hope we find something that we disagree on.
Yeah. So I mean, let's focus on the things not to add. I think that's a really important thing. I don't really think that you should put a objective statement or a, like, kind of cover letter type statement in your resume. Mm-hmm. A cover letter, that's where you can include that. But with the resume, it's like focus on three main items to me. Sure. And that is experience, skills, education. Yep. Those are the ultimate deciding factor. The topic has come up as of late with Apple and Google with the in regards to having a degree. Mm-hmm. And I do feel like a degree is, in a sense, it shows a commitment. Yeah. Really. You spent 4 years to do this thing, to get a piece of paper. You learned, I'm sure, a lot from that about yourself, about, how to interact with people. But really, it shows that commitment level. Yep. And that's what a company I think, should be looking for when they're looking at a degree is, what it's in, but the fact of, like, what that means. Yep. No, I agree. I was just saying this on a different podcast, but my son, he's 6. He just started going to kindergarten. And after, like, the first 2 weeks of school, he was already coming home going, like, I hate school. And I'm like, dude, this is way too early for you to think that. And I was like, what don't you like about it? He was like, the work. And some of the things that I'm thinking in my mind, I'm like, I get it, dude. Yeah. I'm not a fan of it either. Like, the schooling stuff, like, it's hard to tell him, like, you've got to do this, because at the same time I'm going, like, yeah, that does suck. The most important thing that I think you get out of school is learning to learn. And I think that's what your degree actually shows, is that you've got this level of commitment, and hopefully you've learned to learn. Mm-hmm. There's other ways to demonstrate that you know how to learn outside of a degree, but I just think the degree is another measuring stick. It's just another component to validating. Exactly. Yeah. And that whole learning to learn element, it's obviously hard to convey that you're able to do that, but again, the resume, the focus on bringing getting enough in there to get you in
Yep.
so that you can show off that you do know how to do that your personality, you can actually open up and be you. Because on a piece of paper, most everybody looks like most everybody to a certain point. But when you get in person, that's when it's like, oh, they fit our culture. They answered it this way. That means this and that. You see more of who somebody is.
Yep.
And they can explain things better there. And that's why, so people talk a lot about like these pitches, like elevator pitches and whatnot about yourself. And it's really interesting to me because it's like, hey, cram, I've seen some resumes as of late that have so much in them, like every single piece of white space on there, except maybe the border, the margin is just taken up.
Yeah.
And I'm just thinking, man, you're trying to consolidate a whole life to one piece of paper. And if you remember back in, like, there's this guy named Motormouth who did a FedEx commercial like back in the day, and he's the fastest talker alive. He's got a world record for that. Okay. Talking the fastest. Go look that up. It's funny. It's on YouTube for sure.
That's funny.
But it's like what you're basically doing is forcing a recruiter or anyone to try to read lines that fast.
Yeah.
But they're trying to read this page document of, they don't even know where to go in it. And it's just.
And so often what happens to that resume then?
That thing ends up in the trash
next
faster than you look at it, because it really just looks like a big square on the page.
And it's funny because if you're also hiring, if you're looking for a UX position and you got a UX recruiter or UX talent that's looking at, they're going like, obviously you didn't understand the user experience here.
And that's what's interesting is you'll see, and for good reason, like people are trying to, obviously what you're doing is you're trying to show the things that you've done. But it's not about showing all the things that you've done. Yeah. It's about showing the things that matter.
Yeah. And that's enough, right?
Yeah.
Now, I also want to get into this because I think it's not as black and white as I once thought it was. But you mentioned earlier that on paper, a lot of people can look identical. And so I always then took the approach like, okay, then how do I make myself not look identical? So I want to interject some sort of personality into this resume.
Sure.
But I think that's another place where people can go overboard, right?
You got to be real careful with the personality. I mean, if you've ever interacted with somebody that's overly bubbly and you're not, you don't really want to be around that person. Sure. You want to be kind of, the person who's just, he kind of just rides the line, really. There's you get a little bit in there to make it yours.
Yep.
But it's not like, okay, let's let's go somewhere, but don't tell so and so.
Yeah.
It's like, so I think there was one huge thing. So my friend Lucas Gallo, who actually works at, sorry if I mispronounced his name, Lucas, if you ever watch this.
He won't, I guarantee it.
You never know. He works at Google.
Okay.
And as a visual designer. And I remember I sent him my resume one day, and it was, nobody will see this on, I mean, you can post it if you want.
Sure.
But it was the one with the graph on it.
Okay.
On the bottom left.
Yeah.
And that was like a big thing to like, for a lot of designers that I saw, was like adding these little graphs, like 3 out of 5 and 4 out of 5 in like certain areas. Dude. And the thing that was so funny, which afterwards, you realize, oh yeah, that's really stupid to put a graph on, because you're saying like, who wants to hire somebody who's 3 out of 5 in Sketch? Like, why do you think you're 3 out of 5? That's horrible. You're selling yourself short.
I don't see anything good that comes out of that. Because then it's the same time, like, people skills, 5 out of 5. Oh, you think so? Because you didn't interview 5 out of 5.
Well, and the other thing is when so a lot of, sometimes a lot of recruiters, they will run resumes through a processor that like strips a lot of things out of them. Or when you apply, it might strip everything out of that resume.
Interesting.
And that graph now becomes non-existent, and you get just the bottom side of it, and it just like restructures the whole order of what you designed. So yeah, I think the whole graphical side is like, don't include, like, just don't do that.
Yeah.
Don't include the graphs. There's many different reasons, but the main one is like, don't sit here and say that you're 3 out of 5. People want to hire 5 out of 5 people. Really, that's what it is. So bring your 5 out of 5.
Yep.
And yeah.
I will admit to a resume blunder of my own, where I think in a previous iteration, I was trying to interject personality, because in my mind, I was thinking like, if they like me, great. If they read that personality and they don't like me, well, then we probably wouldn't have gotten along had they hired me, you know? And so this is kind of a precursor for what's to come regardless. So I don't mind getting it out there right away.
Yeah.
In my resume, I included actually like a profile picture, like my face on my resume next to my name. And I actually included like 3, maybe 4 sentences as like a bio about myself. Kind of just talking about my mantra, what drives me, some personality type things.
Sure.
And then you mentioned a little bit about like stuffing everything else on this page, and mine may have been borderline full, but I think if I were to go back and redo my resume right now, I would strip that bio out, because I don't think that bio matters right there, but I'm definitely keeping my picture.
Yeah.
And my reasoning is that I read a lot of names personally, like I see a lot of names, but it's so hard for me to connect the dots unless I can put a face with it. And that's why I've kept my face on my resume, is that I want them to be able to see me and my name together to help connect the dots. Yeah. What are your thoughts?
I think obviously there's a lot of HR managers who would comment against that. I do think that thinking about it from the perspective of a recruiter is that really going to determine whether they bring you in or not? And I don't necessarily think it is. I think, if that's really a concern to them that you have your photo, unless it looks, unless like
you're. Well, it's my face.
Well, yeah, but it's like
glowing.
Yeah, there you go. So, like, I think that's a consideration as to like, if you put that on there, just be mindful of like the photo that you are putting on there, just like what you look like.
Sure.
Like it's professional or whatever it is. I would advise keeping the like LinkedIn, and if you're going to put a photo on it, like match it with the link, like use the LinkedIn photo.
Sure.
Because then it's like a correlation.
Yep. Agreed.
But, yeah, I honestly feel like that's a up to you type thing, really. Obviously it takes some space on your resume, but it doesn't have to necessarily if it's small enough. So I think it just depends. I think it depends on the job. It depends on the company that you might be applying for, as to like, there's a company up in Seattle called Wong Duty. And they're, they have a neon sign when you first walk in. That's just a big neon sign flipping you off. And below it says F you.
Nice.
Yeah. And so they're an agency that you might be able to get away with being more creative with your resume.
Sure.
Like more adding bells and whistles. But if you kind of take like the generic pass at a resume and like, okay, but the content still needs to be there. The important content. How it might be structured or laid out may be a little bit up to you and, your photo or whatever it might be. But those main core elements of the experience, the skills and the education, like that is the meat.
Yeah.
However you do that, anything else, okay.
One other piece I'll put on about the avatar or the profile picture. For me, I feel like I see a lot of faces, whether it be on LinkedIn or is in a Slack community or whatever.
Right.
And I'm quicker to draw the connection of like, oh, I know this guy, or oh, I've seen him before, by the face than I am by the name.
Well, and psychology with images and pictures and photos of people have a much higher emotional response than other photos,
Yep.
That and food.
So
like food's a big thing.
What we're saying in this podcast is put your face on it and your favorite meal.
Yeah.
And then your name is the most important thing.
Yeah. You got your plate down there and you got your face and you're pointing at your meal. That's what you should do in your resume.
And if it's not a taco, you're not getting the job.
Oh yeah. Yeah, those tacos. Which we don't have a lot of on the East Coast. Like really good Mexican food.
Dude, you know what?
It's disappointing.
That taco bus up in Rexburg was some of the best Mexican. Yeah. We're getting off topic, but I love that taco bus.
Well, here, listen. We'll talk about experience, okay? The experience of like a restaurant, right? Like, I think what's important for students to do, like in the process of going through school, and you saying like, oh, I only have an intern or I'm only at this. Well, why don't you try to come up with a problem that you see in a business, in a restaurant, and solve for that experience? and like record things, like do interviews with people and, research and whatever it might be, so that you can have more experience about how to solve those problems.
Yep.
I think that's really important for students who can't get the job, they can't do this thing, or they're just in school still and they're not getting maybe enough from the classes.
Yep.
Is find problems, try to create case studies around them. And then, it's not necessarily like, oh, I can include this in my resume per se.
Yep.
Like you might be able to, but it's more like in discussion. Well, I actually did this thing where I did this and this. So again, it's like, get that interview. From that interview, now we got something.
Dude, if I wasn't on a podcast where I was going to blow the speakers of those listening, I'm giving you a standing ovation and a slow clap right now. I could not agree more. I mean, just do something.
Yeah. And it's honestly what I didn't do in school, which, is obviously learning for me. But like one of the things that I, off topic, but is going to like a gas station and how the whole display and typing and like, there's an option. If you guys want an option, there's an option. Go try to solve for that.
Sure.
Solve for people getting on an airline.
Yep.
Checking out groceries. I don't know, whatever it might be. Like find something that like pokes you the wrong way, and be like, why does it poke me the wrong way? How could this be better? Okay, let's see if that, like, what options there are, and then explore it.
And again, specifically, if you're a UX designer trying to get a UX position, make sure you're focused on that problem. If you're doing an Instagram redesign just for the sake of you want to do a UI design challenge, then don't apply for a UX job. Yeah,
it's interesting because like visual design is obviously it adds to the UX of a product. It can add to the UX of something, but the distinction between like a UI being solely a UI. And I will say that my, when I got hired at Willow Tree, the project I worked on was a visual design project actually, just to see if like, hey, do you have the visual?
Right.
But yeah, in the mindset of continual learning or learning to love learning, like when you start to explore those options outside of class, that is learning to love learning.
Yep.
And kind of the psychology of like what works for people, what doesn't work for people, understanding behavior and why people do what they do.
Yep.
Like that's what you'll find out when you start doing external projects.
So back to the resume. If we were to now move beyond the idea that let's showcase the experience real quick. Let's showcase some of your skills. Is there a right way and wrong way to do that skills piece?
Boy, oh boy. I would say, well, when I talked to a more VP level over the HR department for a company in Seattle, he told me about the skills section, and basing it in like UX design is, I know Sketch,
right?
I know InVision, Zeppelin, like, the common tools of the trade. And and honestly, like, go and download them. There's usually free trials and all that, and just learn them. Learn how they function, apply that, and those are skills that companies will ask you on a phone interview. Do you know how to use this? Do you know how to use that? Well, those, if they're written down on a resume, are just like, oh, yep, they know what tools we use. Awesome.
Does it change?
I guess that's tools more than skills.
No, but that's kind of what I'm thinking. That's where I'm going. Does it change what level of how much experience you have? Because legitimately, if I'm hiring a senior UX designer, I assume you know those skills.
Yeah, the quality of the skill. And by quality, I mean, you could spend 3 years working on something, but you never learn anything from it. You could spend 3 months doing the really getting into it and learn a ton. So I don't really know on that.
So you still include it or not include it?
Skill set wise, well, like in my resume, you'd see, and just so everyone knows, like my resume can continually be improved upon as everything in life can be continually improved upon. But my skills is like that I've done research, that I've done like product strategy, like that I actually have strategized on products so that and you could say like buzzwords, which, disrupt is a buzzword. But when you say a specific like skill, like product strategy, that is a skill that you have discussed or have done in the past. I think the thing that I wonder about is how you convey well, you really can't convey that quality through a resume until you like discuss it one-on-one, and then they can tell like, okay, you learned this from that. That's, that's where you see the quality of what they learned from that experience.
Yeah. It's a qualifier though, right?
I mean, when you're looking for a product designer, and obviously getting into like titles of UX design in this, and like a product designer where they're at Willow Tree looking for people who know visual, they know strategy, or at least they've touched that. Mm-hmm. It's mainly like, what you need to do to get this accomplished. Yep. And you've experienced elements of that along the way, yep. From getting there. And so including that you've done the research, that you've done like prototyping or even animation or whatever it might be, that you have done, it's important. Be honest.
Yeah. Do you ever watch Friends?
Jeez. I haven't.
No?
I mean, classic, growing up, dude. My mom watched it a lot.
So Joey's he's the actor of the group, right? Yeah. And there's a couple episodes where he's putting together resumes and they're reviewing it, and it says like, I know French, and he doesn't know French. He's like, and horseback riding. He's like, I've never ridden a horse in my life, but this is why they bring me in. And he's got an audition where he's got to now speak French, and he doesn't know anything. And it's just a classic, like, don't put these skills on here if you don't
yourself.
Actually know it.
Yeah,
don't call yourself a product strategist if really you don't have a whole lot of experience with it. It may be something you're passionate about or something you want to go into more, but if you're going to put that in your resume as like, that is my strength, you're going to be asked then.
Jeff Bezos, he said that the most intelligent people are wrong constantly.
Sure.
Because then they know how to like learn when it's right.
Right.
And so when it comes to like being honest, it's, I know that I'm not the best. Mm-hmm. I'm striving to do like these things, and here's what I have done. Yep. If that's not good enough for you, that's okay. You really have to realize when you get denied from a company, like you submit a resume, you don't get an interview. It takes 3 months for you to. Now, I will say to companies that I do think that they can improve the communication when you get rejected, because it's kind of like a bad taste in people's mouth. Like, you took 3. You think I'm going to reapply? This kid, like a few months down the line, could be bomb. He could be amazing, but because of the way you kind of handled that process of denying him, he may never reapply.
Sure.
And that's also the back way is like, well, as a company, if you want those people who are real dedicated to you, they'll realize that they still want to work for you. But
there's a catch-22 in it, right?
Oh, totally. There's a back and forth from both sides, but just being honest and saying like, as a business, you have certain goals you need to reach. If I'm not able to do that, that's okay.
Yeah.
That's your business goal. I'm going to just keep applying to those other places and realize that you just need to add more things and might reapply back in the future. But really just being honest in a resume tells a lot. Because then when you show up at that in-person interview, you've done all this like maybe, fancy showing off. And then you show up and they're like, so what about this thing? And you're like cold sweats. And you're trying to, get through talking about, words that you might use as a product strategist and all this.
You actually just triggered something else in my mind that I want to jump to in a second, but I want to recap then on this skills section. Is it safe? Is it agreeable then that in the skills portion of your resume, let's not worry about things like, I know Photoshop, I know Illustrator, I know InDesign, I know XD, I know Sketch, I know InVision Studio, and instead focus on I've got experience in building mobile products. I've got experience in product strategy. I've got like those, labeling those as your skill sets as opposed to the hardware that you know.
Yeah, I think you I would say relate your skills to the description of the position. Like if you see in there, so I would focus on that first. Like we want people who know this thing. If I have knowledge in that, okay, a little skill there.
Yep.
Product strategy.
Sure.
And if you see in there, we use Sketch, this and this. Well, okay, Sketch and this and this, like, because you do have knowledge in it, and that is obviously catering to that. And those little words they'll recognize, be like, okay, Sketch, okay, cool. We should bring this guy in. Yeah, he knows this stuff.
Yep.
So I think again, it's catering it. There's also the trying to fill space. So I would say after you've gone through the description, really consider what things do you think would help that company.
Yep.
And that's an important part is when you're doing research about the company and, asking maybe the question in a phone interview or just in general is how can I help you?
Mm-hmm.
What can I do to make your business better?
If
as you know, as joining the team.
Those 3 people who are listening right now, I think just got a huge golden nugget right there.
Yeah.
Because I think if you're talking about, this is the job posting that they have, these are the skills that they're looking for, I've addressed those, and then I've done my homework enough to recognize that I think this is how I could also contribute to the team, and I'm going to jot down a couple of these skills. I think that's solid.
Oh, yeah.
Very smart move.
Yeah. Anything outside of that, just don't fill space just to fill the space.
Agreed. 100%.
Because you might put something down that, who knows, they're like, nah, throw it away.
Yeah. Be
mindful, be logical with what you're putting down on there.
So another one that I want to talk about that you jogged this memory in my own head, but I've talked about this actually once before, but I went from startup to startup to startup.
Yeah.
And when you are at the startups and titles are just thrown around kind of willy-nilly, I sometimes can see that hurting people more than anything else.
Oh, title on a resume?
Yeah.
Oh, yeah.
So I had the big fancy title as creative director at these startups. And I'm not letting that go to my head. When you're the creative director at a company of 8 people, it doesn't mean a whole lot.
Yeah.
But what I saw is that when I left that on my resume, people aren't looking for a creative director. For example, when I applied at Domo, they're not looking for a creative director.
Mm-hmm.
They're looking for a UX designer. Are you a UX designer? Well, I've had the title of creative director. Don't let the titles go to your head.
Yeah. I think the important thing, I think that'd be a good question to ask like a actual recruiter when they pass over those at the initial onset. And I do feel like that's true of, you put creative director on there and it's like, well, we're not an ad agency,
Mm-hmm.
like we're not Don Draper.
Mm-hmm.
We're not looking for a Don Draper.
Yeah.
When I was at an ad agency, I was, I gave myself the name of Dan Draper.
Okay.
So dumb. Okay. Anyways, that's a separate thing. But, so I, just like the title, I just, more often than not, when you go and look at like my resume or just people who have jobs at maybe like Facebook and things, and you wonder like, they might have their resume public and you go look at that. Sometimes it's just designer
mm-hmm.
or UX designer, whatever it might be, but designer or, very simplistic titles that kind of strip the senior off of it, this, that, because it's like, okay, I mean, if you're looking for a senior level position, I had a discussion today about Podium.
Yeah.
Like kind of cutting off junior level designers because they're looking for more seniority.
Mm-hmm.
In those cases, that might be the thing. I just think you really need to, again, be mindful about what that title is and does it apply to that job, to that description. And you've read through resumes, so obviously you are looking for specific things. And I guess I'd pass it back to you and say, how does that affect you?
Well, one thing that I've learned at my time at Domo is that companies, the thought that they put into titles just varies from company to company. And what Domo does for job titles, I think a lot of people who look at it from the outside kind of like scoff at, like, you've got to do what for how long before you get a senior title? And you've got to do what for how long before you get a principal title? Like, well, if I went to this place, they'd give me a senior title right away. And so like people just weight these different things so differently that the title means very little to me. The experience, the time, those things are actually a better indicator to me of how much seniority you have in the industry.
Sure.
If you've got, he had 3 different jobs. He was at each of these jobs for 3 years. Yeah. Okay. He's at the senior level design. Not necessarily there's like a cut and dry way of doing this, but eventually we're going to see portfolio. Eventually we're going to get them in for an in-person interview, and those types of things will be able to vet out what level they're really at.
Yeah. So look at it like this. Okay. So you go to a startup and you're the 3rd designer there, and you're all given the title of senior UX designer. It's like, cool, that's my title. You then go to a product company who's got 200 designers, let's say, and you're now a designer.
Mm-hmm.
Okay. Does that mean that you're less?
You got demoted on paper?
Yeah, it's like, what is that? So if you move up the list of like a resume and you're like senior product designer, it's like, wait, Why did you go down?
Yep.
So if you try to keep things stripped, I think that's a really actually great point to take away from this that I didn't really think about before is put down the title in its simplistic form and then really hit it home with those, the description or the bullet points of like what you did. And I don't know, segueing into this right now is where we want to go, but with those bullet points is the impact that you had, not a list of responsibilities.
Mm-hmm.
You relay what you did.
Yep.
So, and just from feedback from the same VP of HR up in Seattle was like, hey, at Qualtrics, what did you do? Well, I built survey themes. Okay. Don't put that you built survey themes down. How many survey themes did you build? Like 100 plus, like definitely like HTML, JavaScript. He's like, hey, that means that you've coded a lot of stuff. If you did 100 of those, that's a lot of things.
Mm-hmm.
How many screens did you work on for an app or total? Like you've designed a ton of screens. And it's like those things, not only is it like show experience, but it's easy to glance through that resume. And it's very important, in my opinion, to write them out as 300, not, textually. You write 300 because then I can look down and say, oh, 300. What's 300? Oh, nice. That's real good. Or a number, like you increased, growth by blah, blah, blah by launching this feature. It's like, 300% or whatever it might be.
Right.
It's like these show like the impact that you had in the company.
Yep.
Or the experience and just like how many things you did. That means that you probably know what you're doing in that space. Then when you come in, they'll get into the realm of like, how senior is this person?
Yep.
Do they seem like they have done this a lot? Because how does somebody move, let's say, from a designer at one company to a senior designer at another? It's obviously not title to title.
Mm-mm.
It's we bring them in, we see, they're ready to be a senior, and we want them a senior here.
So I was initially put off when I got to Domo and they didn't give me the senior title. Like in my mind, I was like, what WTF? What just happened? Like I've led design teams. I've been doing this for 5 years. Like I was kind of like, and they're like, don't let the title get to you. Like we'll vet this out. We'll see what happens. We'll give it 6 months. And, once I realized that they weren't equating title to compensation, like none of that existed. I was like, oh, well, titles really don't matter, do they? And I was like, nope, they sure don't.
Mm-hmm.
We'll jump to the bullet points because I think you brought up a couple interesting things, but one of the things that I did in applying for Domo that I think actually helped more than anything is I went back and I got rid of all those creative director titles because they were titles thrown out willy-nilly. I didn't feel like that was being dishonest. I put more what it actually was. It was a UX lead. There was teams that we had and I was leading the teams and it was in the UX world.
Yeah.
And that was helpful.
I think that's actually really great. Because I think if you strip down a title to like I said, the basic form, but like if you strip down a creative director is what is a creative director really doing? And then you say, okay, well, how can I put that into a very short statement?
Mm-hmm.
A design lead,
Mm-hmm.
let's say. Or you just got to kind of focus, but like specific titles like creative director, which you'll actually notice in mine that is still on there. But if you put like creative lead or something like that, something that disconnects from what is normally thought of for that, but still relays what you did, I think is really important to just, I wonder if there's a sense of it of like, not like humility, but when you look at that resume and you're just like, oh, okay. So they've led a design team probably. Cool. That's kind of what we're looking for.
Yeah. So, and maybe a skill that they're looking for, right?
Yes. And that's, again, back to the skills.
Yep. No, it's interesting. Now, you mentioned a couple of things about bullet points that I continuously see done over and over again is they just list responsibilities. Specifically if I'm looking at designers' portfolios of guys, girls coming out of school, most of their experience exists in the world of what they did in school. And they put down something like created a mobile app for this, worked with 4 people to do this, did usability research on this. And it was just not dishonest. And I know you did that. as a group, but you didn't do that. Like that was part of the project. What did you do? Like, what was your role in this, and how did that affect what you guys were doing? Like, I like what you said about the numbers. However, I do feel like sometimes people get a little bit fictitious, or they let the numbers lie for them. Mm-hmm. Like 300% growth type stuff is like, well, you went from 1 to 3. Congratulations.
Yeah.
Sometimes I think you can let the numbers do a little bit of dirty work for you.
Yeah.
But I do like seeing how you contributed more so than I like seeing just the list of my job responsibilities included.
Right. And I guess, it's always when I've looked at the resumes. So when I was at BYU Idaho, I was at an ad agency and just looking through like students' resumes on there, and the pieces that always seem to stand out to me, in writing the description for a job, was people who like mentioned their team. Because we need good team players in our ad agency. And I know it's tough because sometimes you're on a project alone and whatever it might be, but it's just really like, there's a whole other thing about like language and, saying I and stripping the I's out of it. It's just like, this is what happened. Improved, blah, blah, blah. Built, da, da, da. Those types of things. But being able to write that in a form that basically takes you out of it. It's like, this wasn't a look at me, look how, how cool I am. It was like, no, this was done and it helped this company. And you relate that. It's like, as a company, I'm like, dang, this guy like really cares about what they work on.
It wasn't putting himself on the pedestal.
Yeah. It's like, you don't get hired at a company for them to help you. Let's say they're hiring you because they want you to help them do something.
Right.
In that exchange, you will probably get something in return, but they're hiring you to fulfill a business need that they have.
Yep.
So if you're relaying in your resume the business impact or whatever about these former companies, the respect that you have for those, and I will say this, like, there might be times when you have a company you work for that like, this is a whole other discussion about like interpersonal communication. Like, let's say you got fired from a company or you get fired from a company, how you leave that company, how you handle a performance improvement plan at a company or whatever it might be. Like, that is extremely important and it shows a lot about you. So, in the future, but on a resume, you can tell somebody who's full of themselves or not. You can tell somebody who cares about the company versus like what they did. And I'll say that I think probably my resume in ways is a little bit full of myself. And to be honest, like, it should, show you off a little bit, but realistically, it's like, show that you are a solution for that company, because here's where I've been a solution to this other company.
Yep.
And that's really what it is.
And I like how you phrase that, because people could easily say, yeah, I'm going to show how I'm the solution for the company. No, not how you're the solution for the company, how you can contribute to the solution for the company.
Yeah. It's because if they don't hire you, they're going to find somebody else to do it for them. Mm-hmm. You are not the solution. You should be showing that you know how to facilitate. That's a really hard word to say for me lately, but facilitate. I'll
put subtitles on this for you.
Yeah, facilitate. That's perfect for you. The solution. You know how to create the environment for the thing to be successful.
100%.
And
you hit on soft skills. I know you said there's a whole different another conversation. These interpersonal skills, these people skills. That's something that I have been harping on now for a while, and I will continue to harp on, because I do think that makes somebody employable, and the way that you can come across as humble, teachable, still hungry. Like, there's balance in all of this, but you can learn a lot by just the way people phrase things. You can learn a lot about how they get into the interview and they come across, how they respond to challenges, how they, I personally, when I'm interviewing, I find a way to ask challenging questions, or maybe questions that would catch people off guard. And even sometimes I ask questions that I know are really dumb, because I want to
see how somebody handles it.
I want to see, are you going to treat me like I'm an idiot? Are you going to treat me like I don't know what I'm talking about. Are you going to belittle me? Or if I ask a challenging question that I know you haven't thought about, are you going to come up with an answer straight out of your butt? Or are you going to say, as in my opinion, a UX designer should, I actually don't know the answer to that. But what I'd like to do is I'd like to ask more questions, and I'd like to dig into that further before I actually come up with a new solution. Or are you throwing a solution right out of thin air, right? Like those are these interpersonal skills that you really can pick up in an interview, and that makes candidates stand out so much further than what a resume does.
Yeah.
That's a whole nother topic.
Like, and again, on this whole other topic is before you ever like write things down on a resume that you've done is this whole aspect of interpersonal communications, because the resume specifically, this conversation focusing on that, but after you get the interview, just as a small tidbit, is like, how are you going to handle that interpersonal communication with them in any, like whatever's thrown at you? Because you might have like a really like sarcastic person that interviews you, and obviously everybody handles that different, but just how do you carry yourself?
Yep.
Are you humble about it?
Yep.
I will say, just so everybody is aware of this, at one of these former companies, I was on a performance improvement plan, and for many different reasons, honestly. But the thing is there was two ways for me to handle that when they approached me about it, and it was get really mad and be like, "This is ridiculous," and quit or whatever it might be. But it was what it was. They recognized areas that I can improve, and I said, "You know what? You're right. Let's do it. Let's improve."
I love it.
And it was a let's improve. It was let's work together so that I can still be a part of this company, and you can still feel like you trust and are confident in in me, and I in you. And by the end of that, I learned so much about how to handle feedback. And I think when you're in design critiques in school, one of the best environments for you to get prepared for these interviews is these critiques, is these feedback sessions. And where a teacher might, I was so grateful. Actually, you probably remember this teacher.
I already know who you're going to say.
Brother Randall.
Oh my.
He would rip the hell out of things.
Kids would cry, dude.
Yeah. No, I remember
out.
that. People wouldn't go to him after hours but you know what? I appreciate so much of that man, and also Brother Mehmet, because man, I might start crying. Holy crap. No, I seriously do, because it's really important for you as a human being. I don't care about if you're in design. It's really important for you as a human being to understand that you're not all that, that your design is not you, that you are again, facilitator of solutions. You are supposed to be contributing to society, to a company, and to be able to separate. Yeah. And that's why it's really important in the resume. You separate this kind of egotistical sense from really what you can help with. That's like an end all be all.
Mic drop, dude. I mean,
yeah,
I hated any of Randall's classes.
They're intense, like no doubt. Like it's tough to want to go
purely because of him, like legitimately,
to do some of these.
And I came from the business world, right? Where in the books, either the books balance or they don't, right? There's a right answer and a wrong answer. And when I got into the art world, I was like, dude, this is gonna be a cakewalk. Who's to say that what answer is wrong? Like I could throw paint on the canvas and I'm right? That's how it works here.
And Randall walks up to you and says, "So why are you doing that?"
Dude, I kid you not. I had this one project that I put up on the board, and it was red text over this black background, and he tore me apart. That was as close as I ever got to walking out of a class. Tore me apart. And I was going like, who does this dude think he is? Like, how can you, sure, you may think that way, but does anyone else think that way? This is early in this career. I walked away from that class to today going, I am more grateful for that single class than any of the other classes, because that's still something that I, at time to time, will struggle with, being able to separate my work from my it's really tough. Personal critique,
for sure.
But that is huge, and how you respond to critique is not a personal attack. It's not a reflection on you. Is tough. Specifically, if you're new at a place, or if you're trying to like stand, I got to prove myself my first month here, and they're giving me feedback like they've got buyer's remorse in hiring me. No, that's not the case. Like you gotta detach yourself from your product, because that's not the case.
It's interesting that you say that, because people, humans. But when you're in these new positions and you get that kind of, what do you call it when you feel like imposter syndrome, right?
Yeah.
Well, that's for everyone. First off, just know that that's everyone.
Yep.
But when you have someone on the team approach you and like question this and question that and question that, and then all of a sudden in your head you're like, man, they probably made a wrong decision. Like they're probably thinking that right now. First off, you created that story in your own brain. They didn't create that. But what is important for you to do is how do you handle after that?
Yep.
And that's what they want to see, because you can train somebody to do pretty much anything, but you can't train them to communicate really well. I mean, it can be a learned thing, but like
hard skills are easier to learn than soft skills.
Yeah, I mean, you sketch, easy.
Yep.
You can go learn that, whatever. But when somebody approaches you and says, "I don't like this, 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 and this," and you're like, "Oh, okay, what are you talking about?" I think what's most important though within that space, I think kind of what Randall might have been looking for, or what other people need are more than likely looking for, is I want to understand why you did that thing. Because if you can't, the big thing that I've been talking about lately is like, if that thing doesn't have a reason for being there, why is it there? And tell me why it's there.
Right.
And, actually, brother, do you remember Brother Mehmet?
Oh, 100%.
Okay. So the first project you do in that class is you create 3 posters at the very end of the class, and you put them up on the wall, take one down, and then he says, okay, now snap that project in half.
Randall made us do that one.
And you're like, wait, what?
Yep.
So many people were like, oh, I don't. And you just kept hearing boards start snapping.
What you're not, for those who are listening, what you're not getting a part of this is that this was weeks worth of work into these things. Like this is time and dedication, critique after critique. This is a final critique. This is a final project. You're turning in your 3 posters, and he says, destroy one. And you're like, oh, I can't. I'm so attached to like what I've done. Dude, that is such a good lesson. Okay, unfortunately, we probably hit our time mark, but I would love to be able to do a part 2 with you, because I think the getting into the office after your resume has been seen and they call you in, the skills in an interview, I think is something that you and I can chat about quite a bit as well.
If there's one just like final thought I would leave with resumes, it's really just being mindful of how does what's on there contribute to what they're looking for. Like, in all honesty, is, whether that's the experience piece, the skills piece, the education piece, like including your hobbies. You can do that after you get hired. You can talk about your hobbies with them. Don't put that on there. But the meat of that resume should show how you are a person who will help solve problems for them.
100%. Okay. Danno, thanks for coming on.
Thank you. This is great.
For those listening, Danno, you can find him on LinkedIn, connect with them, shoot him messages.
Yeah, actually, if anybody wants to send me their resumes to kind of review or whatever that might be, you can go on to... Actually, I can send you just like some links that you can put in probably the description of this, that they can reach out and contact me through. I've got a little calendar set up specifically for people to contact me, and we can do like over the phone interviews and whatever, just to talk through things. I'm not an expert.
He's making himself available.
But I've talked to a lot of experts.
That's awesome.
And I can give some
Nice of you.
back, so.
Cool. Well, that's a wrap, man.
Awesome.
Thanks a lot.
See you guys. Let me turn this one off.